kick things off?
I would be happy to. Thank you, Ken. Hi, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining us. I apologize. My camera works all the time except for today and in fact, just right now because it worked an hour ago. But I am not the focus of today's meeting, so I'll introduce myself and the presenters and hopefully their technology will do what it should. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. We have a great presentation this evening and two really wonderful presenters. I'm Michelle Thornton. I'm the Vice President on the board of TCWP. And TCWP is co-hosting tonight's presentation along with A4 and Oak Ridgers for Responsible Development. So a little bit about A4, since Ellen and Virginia are both board members, that stands for the Advocates for the Oak Ridge Reservation. And they are a nonprofit supporting the preservation of natural resources of DOE's Oak Ridge Reservation. And just a little heads up, mark your calendars because on March 10th, A4 is going to be hosting another Zoom meeting that you might be interested in. It's titled The Biodiversity on the Oak Ridge Reservation, and that's by Dr. Evan Carter. So March 10th, look for that. That is going to be a fun presentation. Let me introduce our speakers. Ellen Smith holds a bachelor's degree in geology and a master's degree from the University of Wisconsin in Madison, where she studied geology and hydrology and received a degree in water resources management. Ellen is recently retired from a long and productive career, 36 years on research staff at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. Ellen participated in a variety of programs, including working closely with the Department of Energy Headquarters Office of NEPA Policy and Compliance. Ellen has also served nearly 2 decades on the City of Oak Ridge Environmental Quality Board and is currently an elected member of our City Council. And she's had that position for a total of more than 11 years. Ellen is also a charter member of A4, is currently its vice president, and is also a member of TCWP. And she's currently serving a 1-year term as chair of the National League of Cities Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources Advocacy Committee. Virginia grew up in Nashville, and her roots go back in Tennessee 7 generations, so longtime Tennessee roots. She is an adjunct professor at the University of Tennessee and a corporate fellow emeritus at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. Virginia has both a BS and MS in mathematics from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville and a PhD in mathematical ecology from the University of Washington. Her work has resulted in 11 books and more than 270 scientific articles. She has served on scientific advisory boards for 5 US agencies, including the Department of Agriculture, Interior, Energy, and Defense, and the Environmental Protection Agency. Virginia was part of the IPCC scientific assessment that received a Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. She is a charter member of A4 also, along with Ellen, and is currently its president and is a life member of TCWP. She also serves on the executive board of the Tennessee chapter of the Sierra Club and the board of trustees of the Tennessee chapter of the Nature Conservancy, a group we all know and love. I will also highlight that both Ellen and Virginia are longtime Oak Ridge residents, so they know our city well. And with that, I will turn it over to both those guys. Thank you.
Okay, I am trying to share my screen. So let me know when I'm successful, Ken, please.
I see it.
Okay, great. I'm really thrilled to be talking with Ellen. She's a great partner, as many of you are on this phone call who have helped us talk about what we're going to do about this proposed racetrack in Oak Ridge. We want to give a brief history and then tell you what we think will be profitable step forwards. And then afterward, we can have some discussion, we hope. So a quick summary of where we are right now is that a real estate developer wants to build this motorsports complex in the Horizon Center, this Oak Ridge Industrial Park. But the site has significant ecological and recreational value. Some years ago, DOE transferred the land for industrial use with major restrictions to minimize environmental impacts. And adjacent property, the Black Oak Ridge Conservation Easement, or BORES, is protected by a conservation easement. In addition, there are popular high quality greenway trails through the area. And we are fearful that this proposed development would destroy those natural assets that DOE has committed to protect, as well as adversely affect recreational users and the nearby residents.
There are questionable claims of the economic benefits of this motorsports tract or motorsports proposal. It's a speculative proposal. The proponent doesn't really have a feasibility study or business plan yet. There's certainly significant indication, and this is supported by our friends at Oak Ridge for Responsible Development, that an industrial development would yield greater public benefits than the motorsports complex could provide. Currently, the situation is that the proposed development can't happen without approvals from both the City of Oak Ridge and the Department of Energy. Rezoning of the property would require City Council approval. It's necessary. They can't build a motorsports complex in an industrial zone, which it is now. Also, DOE has deed restrictions on the property that limit the site to industrial use. Those would have to be waived. And the developer wants federal land that is currently excluded from development to avoid adverse impacts. Next slide. Okay, there's a series of maps here to help orient those of you who don't know where this is. The site is in West Oak Ridge in the Roane County portion of the Oak Ridge Reservation. You can see the location on the screen. It's east of the intersection of Highway 95 and Highway 58. Next slide. This is an oblique aerial view of the Horizon Center Industrial Park, showing the tracts that the Department of Energy, or that the Community Reuse Organization of East Tennessee and the Industrial Development Board, which is currently the actual legal owner of the property, is trying to market for industrial development. Those three large tracts away from the highway are approximately the area where the developer would like to build a motorsports complex. In the foreground, in the lower part of the image, you can see the some of the existing development on the Horizon Center site, the carbon fiber facility of the Department of Energy, Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and the site where it was originally built for Theragenics, most recently has been owned by Greg LeMond Industries. Next slide.
Okay, I'm stuck. Huh. Well, let's see.
Well, the next slide is another picture of the property, just trying to help you understand it. Okay, here's the layout of the Horizon Center, including areas that were set aside as exclusion zones or natural areas in order to allow development of the industrial park component. The yellow areas on the screen were approved for development. The blue shows a 100-year floodplain that was supposed to be protected from development. And there's green or light green around that includes some other areas that were excluded from development in order to minimize the environmental impact of this. So the areas 5, 6, and 7 on the back side of the Horizon Center are where the developer would like to build his motorsports complex. You can see there the existing roads within the Horizon Center are shown on this map. Along the back side of the Horizon Center is the part of the Greenway that has become really popular. It extends along the boundaries of the Horizon Center, and there is a protected site shown on this map that was originally proposed for development, but ended up becoming a protected area principally because it was so hard to actually get to it, both financially and environmentally, to develop it as an industrial site. This is the setting we're talking about. And the next slide.
So we wanted to show you this satellite image because it really makes the point about how special the Oak Ridge Reservation is. In this image, the green is the forest land, and the kind of a light pink is agricultural land, with the red being urban. And you can see that this big area of green is the Oak Ridge Reservation that has some of the plants in it, Oak Ridge National Lab in this central area. So because of this large area of unfragmented forest, there are lots of unique species and habitats in this area that is not to be found anywhere else in the Ridge and Valley province. In fact, the number of species on a per area basis, like number per acre, on the Oak Ridge Reservation is more than in the Smoky Mountains National Park. So it's a quite unique area in terms of biodiversity and in terms of the habitat that it provides. And now we're showing you this other map, lots of maps because we like to know where we are. So we've highlighted in this red area the Black Oak Ridge Conservation Easement kind of in that hatching, and then toward the front of it is where the Horizon Center is, this area that you can see. So it has this conservation area on one side. You see the road, and then across the road is this old growth forest. So it's surrounded by very unique property, which is different from some of the other motor parks that we've been hearing about. If some of you heard that conversation last night. It does have this road that runs along it. And I wanted to give you a little bit about the history of the reservation, which many of you know. I think that it was established in the 40s as part of the Manhattan Project during the war. It originally was about 60,000 acres that was acquired by eminent domain from the people. So we kind of feel like it still belongs to the people. Now, only about half of it is owned and managed by the Department of Energy. And we think it has a number of terrific values. Environmental research that is done on the park is internationally famous for its work on global climate change, on how nutrients as well as contaminants might move through the environment, and other projects that are ongoing and could add to our knowledge of how to protect our environment. There are a number of technological operations that occur here that could not occur anywhere else because of the protection that occurs on the site. As I've said, it has quite unique biological areas. It also has historical and archaeological sites. And then most importantly for DOE and for the people, it serves as a buffer zone for human health and safety. So only parts of the area are accessible. And one of A4's goal is to see that people can get to the area to witness it and to appreciate it. So what I've done here is cut out of this map. This is part of the reservation to show you that several years ago, the Nature Conservancy identified biologically sensitive areas on the reservation, and only showing you this part, you can see it contains very high significance. This is the Horizon Center that has a lot of that kind of aqua, as well as much areas of high significance, this kind of orange, and as well as just general diversity interests. So this has been identified by an independent organization, the Nature Conservancy, as having high value. And then over on the right, this is not a great image, but it focuses on the Horizon Center area itself. and just list a number of features that are there. There's Beaver Dam, there's the Canebrake, there's some caves that have unique species. Evan Carter, who we're going to hear from in March, discovered a new species of cave snail on the Oak Ridge Reservation last year. They're caves, they're limestone barrens, they're limestone cliff, rare species, springs, wetlands, cemeteries, beach, and all different kinds of forests. It is a valuable and unique area. And fortunately, when DOE transmitted the property, they put in place steps to protect those new unique features, as well as to allow industrial development. So advocates for the Oak Ridge Reservation, we call ourselves A4 because we try to be positive. We're for things. We're this locally based 501(c) that was established in 1999. Seems that we're getting old. And we support the preservation of natural resources on the Oak Ridge Reservation for the long-term benefit of the Department of Energy, the local community, as well as national and international interest. People from around the world have strongly expressed their interest in the land. And the values include science and technology, as I said, conservation, the economy and jobs. This provides a lot of opportunities and current activities for the community, public health and safety, education, the regular educational activities that occur when we can get out there, recreation and historical significance.
Okay, a little history here on the establishment of the Horizon Center. Back in the mid-90s, DOE was approached by folks in the region who wanted to, were concerned about economic revitalization of the region. The Cold War had ended, and it was expected that employment would decrease significantly at the federal facilities. And the K-25 site had been projected as a location for reindustrialization after it was cleaned up. But local developers, local business promoters wanted a greenfield industrial park where they could bring in industry that didn't want to wait for a site to be decontaminated and didn't want to be on a dirty site, to help accommodate an urgent need for industrial development in this area. And somebody screened the reservation and found the Horizon Center property was relatively flat and recommended it as an industrial park site prepared to transfer it for industrial development. But the Department of Energy had to do an environmental assessment under the National Environmental Policy Act. And the evaluation found rather quickly that the site had a lot of environmental values, including the floodplain that occupied a large fraction of the property. And the proposed land transfer, converting that property for an industry could have potentially significant environmental impacts. So to avoid potentially significant environmental impacts, which require that an EIS, a full environmental impact statement, be prepared, DOE executed a finding of no significant impact that was legally conditioned on mitigation measures that had been deemed essential to avoiding environmental impacts. And we see here some of the assets of the property that caused interest in protecting the site. As part of that legally required mitigation, they excluded about half of the total area from transfer. That included the floodplain and riparian zones associated with the floodplain. It also included a system of natural corridors that were intended to connect the bottomland habitat along the East Fork Creek floodplain from the upland habitat north of the Horizon Center, north of the proposed industrial parcel. That upland habitat to the north is now part of the Black Oak Ridge Conservation Easement, but that had not been thought of back in the mid-90s when the Horizon Center was established. The areas excluded from transfer also included some rare plant communities and some habitats for protected species. Those habitat corridors that were protected are significant because there are a lot of critters, and this great horned owl is one of them, that benefit from having access to water and access to forest land. They move back and forth. And there are also things like salamanders and frogs and so forth that migrate between wet areas and forest areas. So that connectivity was one of the significant things that were supposed to be protected by the mitigation plan that was established in the mid-1990s. Another requirement was that road and utility corridors were not going to cross certain identified natural areas, particularly those corridors and also the floodplain. And in fact, some of the roads that were built did cross those corridors, but the limitation was considered important when this was established. And back in the 90s, some folks touted this proposed industrial park as a model for the coexistence of industrial uses and natural areas. There's been a lot of monitoring over the years on how it was working. Then sometime after, in the mid-2000s, a new element was added, the Black Oak Ridge Conservation Easement. And this was an area that had been identified as undevelopable in a land use focus group study that DOE supported. And it was extremely limited in its development potential, and it had significant conservation value. So around 2005, I guess, DOE realized that they had an obligation under the Natural Resources Damage Assessment requirements of the Superfund law to compensate the people of Tennessee for the toxic contamination of Watts Bar Reservoir, for the permanent damage to natural resources of Tennessee. And rather than paying a dollar amount for compensation, they had this land available and said, we'll convert that to a permanent conservation easement in order to compensate for the damage that we caused. And the decision to do that involved a negotiation between the designated natural resource trustees as defined by the Superfund law. That was the state of Tennessee, Tennessee Valley Authority, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Department of Energy had to come up with that agreement. And Virginia.
And that agreement was brought to the city of Oak Ridge, and AFOR talked to the city leaders about it and strongly endorsed this idea. To come up with some valuation of the Black Oak Ridge Conservation Easement, an independent consulting firm was hired that came in and did a very careful analysis, and they gave the values of the Borscht, as we call it, in two ways. One was the ecological services. These are the habitats, the water quality, the air quality, other benefits that are achieved by having these 3,000 acres set aside. And the units, they called it, is 441,000 acre years. This is a combination of the amount of land and the time over which it should be of great value to the species that are out there, as well as the humans being some of the species that live nearby and use it. The second value was recreation, which they valued at $6.6 million, which included hiking, biking, bird watching, all kinds of things. And for those of you who go out there, you can easily see that this value is very realistic for the amount of use that the area gets. Now it is managed by the Tennessee Department of Environmental Quality. What is C? Conservation.
Environment and Conservation.
Conservation, TDEC. We always call it TDEC, as a Class 2 natural area. And TDEC does a wonderful job of managing it for the Department of Energy and for all of us that benefit from this area.
Okay, the one of the features of the Black Oak Ridge Conservation Easement, oops, can we go back one?
Yeah, I see it, sorry.
Yeah, one of the features of Black Oak Ridge Conservation Easement is the Greenway. DOE Patrol Road adjacent to the natural area that was made available to the public for recreational use. And that's related to the financial value that was calculated for the value of the Black Oak Ridge Conservation Easement as natural resource damage compensation. The Greenway has proven to be an extremely popular recreation site. Usage greatly exceeds the amount that it was assumed back in that mid-2000s analysis of the potential economic value. I think they estimated 30 people a day would use it. And there's plenty of evidence that 30 is a low day for this area. It's much higher than that. It's become popular not only for the city, but throughout the region. We have reports of Knox County bringing senior citizens out from the O'Connor Senior Center to go on walks on the Greenway. Another interesting story is the number of high school and probably middle school cross-country teams that run on these trails during their season. So it's a popular site for all kinds of people. And interestingly, in the last few years, City of Oak Ridge conducted the city blueprint process to identify city's visions and goals and develop kind of a framework for future planning for the city. Public input during the development of the city blueprint showed that Oak Ridgers placed highest value on preserving natural assets, that green was a significant value in the city, and outdoor recreation was one of the things that residents treasure. There was almost unanimity on that from the people who participated in the process, and that's documented in the published city blueprint report. Next slide. Okay, but back to the Horizon Center. After 1996, when it was approved initially for lease to the Community Reuse Organization of East Tennessee, and subsequently for actual transfer, CROAT, the Community Reuse Organization of East Tennessee, received a fairly significant amount of federal money to support the development of the industrial park that they wanted to establish there. And they invested quite a bit in aesthetics in the area. The images here, you can see some of the sculpture that was installed, nice landscaping around it, impressive grassed medians on the streets through the Horizon Center, brickwork to highlight the locations of sidewalks and street crossings at intersections. It's beautifully developed. In the third image on this screen, if you can see it, that the artist that sold that sculpture to the CROAT back in the early 2000s said that he was paid $80,000 for it, and the cost of the landscaping around it is not included in that price. That's merely what the artist received. So we have an extremely high-end, attractive industrial park. Next slide. But although much money has been spent, it's empty. And I think most of you who have driven through West Oak Ridge will recognize that this is what a lot of the Horizon Center looks like. Nothing much has happened there. And that's actually the background for the proposal for the racetrack that the Industrial Development Board, which controls it right now, has been frustrated. They have actually spent probably over $1 million in about 10 years on maintaining this property, including maintaining the landscaping, particularly maintaining the landscaping. And they have not been successful in finding tenants. So they were approached by a real estate developer who has a notion that this would be a great place for a racetrack. And here we can see some of the concepts of what he thinks he would like to do with the racetrack. There would be 4 miles of raceway with crossings through the areas that are identified as protected natural areas. And he would like to own all of the property. The bottom of the screen, it's awfully hard to see or read, but there are notations there showing the different things that he would build in different parts of this property, but he would like to occupy everything if possible. So next slide, in Virginia.
So this next slide shows that same map with a little more detail. It's kind of colorful, but the orange includes exclusion areas, and you can see this racetrack going around and cutting right across it. And we have no idea how a racetrack would cost these areas that are creeks, wildlife corridors, and maintain protection of those areas. And that has not been discussed by the developer. The kind of things that he's talking about are listed over here on the right. You know, the racetrack, a clubhouse, garage rentals, restaurant areas, event area, amphitheater, conference, lodging, all kinds of things, but no discussion really of how this kind of racetrack would be compatible with this exclusion areas. Yet, there are some kinds of industrial developments that would enjoy having walkways that you could see some of these beautiful natural areas and also have access to the Black Oak Ridge Conservation Easement to the north of this area. So when this was proposed in the early spring, shortly thereafter, a group got together in March that eventually called themselves the Oak Ridgers for Responsible Development that have been focused on what are the benefits to the quality of life, to the economics of land use, to jobs and quality jobs, and to protecting natural assets. And they have been pulling together a lot of information, which we'll summarize shortly, but some of those members are on the phone here and might want to answer questions toward the end. They have been strongly urging the city to perform its due diligence in evaluating the proposal and to honor the fiduciary responsibility to tax-paying citizens who are concerned about impacts on property tax and land value, and to place residents' concerns above the development concerns. They have explored effects on property values, on noise, on the racetrack as compared to light industry that might be more compatible. So to sum up, they are for development of this area, but just not this particular development, and feel that it's very important to look for the right opportunity.
Well, noise is one of the almost obvious concerns when we talk about a racetrack. And the track proponents, and this includes information that was provided to City Council back in February when we were told about this as a potential concept. They claimed that this would be used heavily by electric vehicles and that modern race cars are quiet. And that's the claim that we heard. The noise modeling was done by the Department of Energy as part of the something called the environmental assessment addendum that they did for the proposal to develop this thing. And their analysis showed that racing noise would not be heard in residential areas, including particularly focused on the Westwood subdivision, which is northeast of this site ways. Actually, there would be more noise in some other West Oak Ridge locations, but the Westwood subdivision is the one that was focused on because it was the closest that is actively occupied right now. But concerned residents have noticed that they've learned about other road course tracks around the country intended for wealthy car owners, which is the principal audience proposed for this motor course. And modeling was done, and people were told that there wouldn't be any significant noise. But now they report that it's impossible to carry on a conversation sometimes a mile away from the track, which is not what the models predicted. Even in this case, the map here shows one iteration of the model, and it shows you can't see the numbers on the contours on that map. But pretty much everything red here is a noise level that would require hearing protection for people who care about their hearing. So this is showing intolerable noise levels actually on the Greenway, which is extremely close to the racetrack part of this on the back side. And that's this is just one of the model results. This is not the most extreme of the results that was shown in the DOE report. The analysis did not acknowledge the impacts on greenways users, and significantly didn't acknowledge the impacts of the noise on wildlife in the area adjacent, particularly the Black Oak Ridge Conservation Easement wooded areas. That's important because many wild animals need quiet. They depend on sound to communicate with each other, to warn of predators. And they will either avoid areas that are loud or die because they can't reproduce and without quiet to protect their young. That's of particular concern in that the Black Oak Ridge Conservation Easement exists, among other things, to protect nesting habitat for sensitive songbirds that insist on having large wooded areas to make their nests. So that value of the Black Oak Ridge Conservation Easement could be eliminated by significant noise that affects the critters that are supposed to be having an opportunity to survive by living there. Next slide. So folks who have been studying this are wondering why we can't trust the noise model. We don't know for sure, but there are a number of reasons that probably contribute. One is that the physics of noise, which I don't understand, I'm not a physicist, appear to be more complex than what the available models can handle. And these models typically are used primarily for aviation noise. And people who live near airports say that the models don't work very well on aviation noise, that that the complexity is greater than the models understand for that noise source. But in addition to that, the motorsports noises don't seem to have been adequately represented by the models that were designed for aviation. And the aviation models deal with noise that occurs overhead for fleeting periods of time. It doesn't deal with a continuous source on the ground. It doesn't deal with the frictional effects of vehicles running along the ground surface. Additionally, most of the modeling that's been done so far considered only one race car at a time. It didn't consider the additive, multiplicative impacts of a number of different vehicles operating at the same time. We've not had modeling of the potential noise from some of the other developments in this proposed motorsports complex. That would include a music amphitheater, loudspeakers that probably go with both the music amphitheater and any kind of a vehicle track, the go-kart track, vehicles coming in and out of the property for visiting, attending events, and so forth. And there has been some reporting of the results of multiple vehicles on the property, for example, in a race. But when those results have been reported, they've been reported as averages over several hours, which includes time when no racing is occurring. So the predicted values look less than they really would be at times when there's a lot of vehicular activity. Next slide. The economics of land use. This is something that our friends from OR4RD who are on this call have been focusing on really well. They pointed out a number of issues. First is the concern that if noise drives residents away, it's going to lower the assessed value on that existing residential property. The loss of property tax is something that needs to be taken into account in looking at the potential benefit of a motorsports complex. Additionally, they've looked at the potential alternatives in industrial development on this property. And, for light industry, which is what this industrial park was supposed to be established for, the amount of land that could be developed equates to numbers of jobs in the thousands, not numbers of jobs merely in the hundreds. And the types of jobs would be more likely to be professional and high-skilled jobs versus low-skilled, low-paid jobs for people working on a racetrack, food vendors, and that sort of thing. They're concerned about compatibility with other activities on the Horizon Center. There is at least one private industry on the property that would be suddenly adjacent to a motorsports complex, and estimated that tax benefits, particularly property tax, would be much higher from industrial development than from a racetrack, which does not have much construction to add to real property value. It's mostly pavement, which doesn't necessarily rate high in the analysis of assessment for tax purposes. And they've pointed out an example that Pratt & Whitney in Asheville has recently announced a plan for a track that would be smaller than the development areas on the Horizon Center property right now, and is expected to be a $650 million plant that would spawn more investment, more development. Whereas the proponent here is talking about a $50 million development on a much larger land area with questionable long-term benefits. Next slide. Okay, there's a decision process on this thing, and focusing here on the city decision. The city staff and the Planning Commission have now devised a proposal for a new zoning classification tailored to accommodate the developer's proposal. This is called a special recreation district. It would be a new zoning district, and it would allow motorsports parks, zoos, camps, retreats, amusement parks, golf courses, and ball fields. Variety of, it's defined basically by the kinds of things that would be built there. And it also could have associated hotels, restaurants, residences to support those kinds of businesses. City Council has to approve that zone in order for it to be added to the city zoning ordinance. The first vote by City Council is scheduled for this Monday evening, February the 8th. There will be a public hearing at that meeting. There's an opportunity for residents to sign in to participate in the Zoom public hearing. This is an online meeting, so it's an online public hearing, a virtual public hearing, but people can participate by signing up earlier in the day to get their names on to be called upon to participate that evening. Then, assuming that council approves the proposed zone on 2 separate readings, there's an additional need before this can be can go into effect for City Council to approve the use of the zone at the Horizon Center site, and that also requires 2 separate votes. Before those votes occur, the Planning Commission will have an additional process of considering the proposal to zone the Horizon Center property as special recreation before that goes to City Council. But Planning Commission makes a recommendation. Their decision is not permanent and final. Council is the one that makes the final decision. A4 believes that the city should seriously consider the impacts of this proposed action on traffic, livability, and the compatibility of this proposal with the city blueprint that was recently adopted, as mentioned earlier. Next slide. There's also a decision process that the Department of Energy would have to take. And currently DOE is expected to defer its decision until after the City Council takes final action. What they've done so far is that DOE issued a draft environmental assessment addendum. That's not something that I've ever heard of as a type of NEPA document, but they invented it. It was issued for public comment in August, and it suggested that there was no significant impact from changing the land use from industrial to whatever, and nor from eliminating the protected natural corridors to allow a racetrack on this property. That was issued for public comment. Over 700 comments were received. We believe that many of them are going to require significant effort to address. And I would question just how much employee time and money we think the employee time and taxpayer money our federal government should spend to support development of a racetrack on land that was previously committed to conservation. But DOE will have a decision to make. They could decide that there's potentially significant impact and it would have to require an environmental impact statement, or they could decide, or they could decide to drop the project, or they could declare that there's no significant environmental impact and they want it to go forward. If they do that, if they decide to eliminate deed restrictions and relinquish protected land, their DOE will be vulnerable to a citizen lawsuit under the National Environmental Policy Act for failing to prepare an EIS. And NEPA is enforced by citizen litigation. It's not enforced by any regulations other than regulations defining how agencies are supposed to implement it. So there is case law that says that an agency that has an indication of potentially significant environmental impact and fails to prepare an EIS can lose in court and be required to go forward with an EIS. Another potential consequence for DOE is that the natural resources damage assessment compensation value that they're credited with could be affected adversely by a project that would have adverse impacts on the value of the Black Oak Ridge Conservation Easement that they got credit for. So on to you, Virginia, on the next slide.
So we wanted to let you know, if you don't know, that the Oak Ridge League of Women Voters has looked at this information and in December issued a statement of concern about the motorsports complex at the Horizon Center. They were particularly concerned about plans to cut across previously protected natural areas, about the impact on noise and traffic on the Black Oak Ridge Conservation Easement, as well as harm to the West Oak Ridge communities. And they called upon the City Council to reject the zoning changes necessary for that to happen. And so that is available if you're interested in looking at the full declaration of concern. So what A4 is suggesting that you do is to contact the important people, send letters or emails, we hope, to the editors of the Oak Ridger, to Oak Ridge City Council, and you heard that that should be done by February the 8th if possible, with copies to the City of Oak Ridge, particularly Mark Watson and Jack Suggs, and to TDEC, Debbie Duran, to TWRA, Shannon Young, and to the USDOE, John Shaweri. We could provide those email addresses if you need them. These are the people who are managing the land and among the trustees for the Black Oak Ridge Conservation Easement that is part of the protected area. And the things that we think you need to point out are for the city, that maintaining the current industrial zone for the Horizon Center really allows full flexibility for industrial use it was intended for, and to not allow the motor racetrack in the Horizon Center, but to seek out light industry instead. and to DOE to ask them to recognize their legal obligation to retain the recreational benefits and ecological services on the Black Oak Ridge Conservation Easement, as well as to preserve the natural corridors and buffers on the Horizon Center as it was set up to protect the animals and plants and communities and habitat that is out there. And I want to end with going back to A4 being a positive group for being for positive changes in the area. We have a history, and Oak Ridge has a history of planning for benefits to the economy, to the social, and to the environmental benefits. And this plaque is out on the Horizon Center that recognizes the ecological significance of that crosshatch area we showed you with some of the maps that is now protected. And this was an agreement that was made between Tennessee Parks and Greenways Foundation, DOE, Croat, who was managing the land at the time, as well as A4, who got together and worked out a plan to preserve that 50-acre parcel. And we're not asking for all areas to be preserved. We're asking for development that is in tune with the goals of the people in Oak Ridge, as well as with the protection that's already there for the environment. So this is the end of my slides, and I will stop sharing, and maybe we can have some discussion.
So Virginia and Ellen, I guess the question I have for you is, do you want me to kind of go through some of the questions that have been asked, or do you want me to ask those people to unmute themselves and ask them themselves?
Whatever you think is best.
And this is Michelle Thornton. Everybody who joined late, I'm Vice President with TCWP, but I just want, if you can quickly, for the respect of time, since we're closing on the hour, you did record this. If you'll let folks know where that will be available, and then if people want to drop off, or if Ellen and Virginia, I want to be respectful of your time. If you need to go at the top of the hour, people can find the recording.
Sure. So we are recording this. We will put it up on our YouTube channel, and that will be accessible from our website. And it's also being streamed on Facebook. So Facebook will have a recording. And so on TCWP's Facebook page, you should be able to see it on our Facebook page as well.
Great. Thanks, Ken. And thanks everyone for joining us today. And go ahead with questions.
So one of the early questions that was asked was had to do with the developer has an interest in maintaining green space and trails. And do you see a way in there being a coexistence between what it is that the desires of A4 have and what the developer may be able to maintain?
Well, I'm looking at the chat now and see that Doug Colclasure has already partly answered this. The racetrack requires a 10-foot fence to minimize risk to wildlife onto the track and high-speed sports cars moving along. And clearly that's going to disrupt the corridors that the animals need to getting from place to place. And so, you know, we would love to work out compromise. A4 is very much toward compromise, but I just don't see any opportunities with a racetrack that crosses so much of these highly valuable corridors and with this 10-foot fence.
And one question I'm looking at here is from Judy Gray, is if this property is so fine for development, why has the city been unable to contract with any businesses to build there? And yes, it has been vacant and waiting for business for many years. One significant factor is that with all the investment that was made in aesthetics, it was not really equipped with some of the basic infrastructure that industry truly requires. That the electric capacity is very limited, and in recent years, the city electric department has asked for the ability to effectively eliminate some of those exclusion zones in the Horizon Center in order to build a 69 kV power line along the Greenway into the back side of the Horizon Center to provide higher higher electric capacity. We contend that it should be possible to upgrade the power line that goes around the front side of the Horizon Center along the highway to bring power into the park. The industrial park currently has a restriction that requires all power be underground. And that's one of the challenges there, because the underground lines that they installed are in conduit that would not accommodate any more electric lines. So it would require above ground poles inside the industrial park, but most industrial parks do have above ground power poles. And I also would suggest that the amount of money that's been spent by the Industrial Development Board and CROAT over the years could have been invested in doing those power improvements instead of the things that was spent on. So it seems like resources have been squandered on the wrong thing. Another thing that some folks have been pointing out is that there's been a lot of demand for a spec building in this property. That's something that the IDB was asked to do a number of times, but they chose not to do that. Essentially, they chose other routes for promoting it. But the marketing to the right people and improving the infrastructure probably would make a big difference out there.
There was a question about your interpretation of DOE's extension to look at the concerns that were sent to them with regards to a ruling on the letters that were sent to DOE, and how they've extended that until, I guess, after June.
I'm not sure that they've extended the comment period on this.
No, not the comment period, but they're gonna do some more research, I guess, into.
They are getting a team of highly qualified biologists and ecologists on site that will look at some of the issues that have been raised, and that could be quite time and expense consuming depending on how far they go. But we know, since A4 sent in some of these detailed questions, that the questions are going to be.
I assume that they're waiting for the city to make a decision, in part because if the city decides against this, they won't have to go to the trouble of producing an extensive environmental response. There were a lot of serious issues with the document that they produced, and it will not be easy for them to respond to them.
Well, and somebody asked about if there's a way that this could go to a vote for the citizens, on a referendum for the citizens to vote on. Probably, I don't see an avenue for that. Do you?
Is someone talking? I can't hear. Maybe
Oh, I'm sorry.
that the internet has cut out.
Someone had asked a question about whether this could go and have the citizens vote on it as opposed to being run through city council. Could you hear me?
Ellen can answer this if she'll hear the question. The question is if some kind of city referendum could make a decision. In the decades I've lived in Oak Ridge, I've never heard of such a process being enacted. I have heard of groups being unhappy with council people and voting them out because of decisions they've made, but that's retroactive and not proactive.
So Virginia and Ellen, I've got 8:02. If you guys are okay, or if you want to stay on, I want to be respectful of your time. And I know that we can go on all night, probably, talking about this with everybody involved. There's a lot of folks online. But I think that to be respectful of everybody's time, we'll go ahead and wrap up. And thank everyone for joining us today. And again, this presentation will be available, and we encourage everyone we know that there are folks who are on both sides of this, and it's important always to voice your concerns and be involved. So,
Michelle,
yes, ma'am.
can I jump in? Because Tanya Vargas raised a really important point, and I see.
Oh, sure. Yeah, go ahead. I don't want to cut it short, but I do want to respect your time. Yep.
Yeah, I don't think you can see Michelle. So, oh, this is Eugene Vargas. Sorry, under his wife's name. The question is, has there been an accurate valuation and an analysis of the cost of benefits being done by the developer? And we have not seen such a valuation. They supposedly have asked for a German company to do that. Part of the issue is it's not really clear what the plan is. There's a whole lot of variation in what is being proposed. And so we don't really know what it is. And we haven't seen any evidence, from the environmental perspective that there's serious consideration of the cost of changing some of these protected areas and impacting them in a way. So, the short answer is no, we haven't seen such evaluation. And we feel like that the city of Oak Ridge and the citizens of Oak Ridge deserve one so that a careful decision can be made. And thank you for that question.
This is Dan Robbins. I'm chairman of Greenways Oak Ridge, and I learned a long time ago that in dealing with city council, if a member gets 5 independent calls from various citizens, they consider that a landslide. And so if you are against this, I suggest that Ellen make available their phone numbers, their email numbers, or their phone numbers, and those people who are against this contact city council and voice their concerns.
Thank you, Dan. And it's good to see you.
Yeah, the email to go to all city council members is citycouncil, no spaces, at oakridgetn.gov. No spaces in any of that. citycouncil@oakridgetn.gov. Thank you, Dan.
Yep.
And thank you, Ken and Michelle. We really appreciate it. We appreciate everybody listening carefully to this, and further discussion is always helpful.
And Virginia, I was going to say, I'm going to share a link to the statement put out by the Sierra Club, and it has everyone's email in that link that you mentioned before. So those people look at that. That'll be on our Facebook, on TCWP's Facebook page.
Great.
Yep. Thanks, Ken. Okay, we will wrap it up then. Thank you again, Ellen and Virginia, for your time and expertise. And thank you everyone else for joining us, and be safe and be well. Bye-bye, everybody.